Here's how I made my first VTuber in 7 days. Well, not really. I've been wanting to learn how to make models in Live 2D for a while, but I've been scared. I opened up Live 2D Cubism once 2 years ago, and then I immediately closed it back down and went back to playing Dead by Daylight. Looking at it as a new program has always been very daunting and scary, so to make things easier for myself, or more difficult depending on how you look at it, I decided I'd give myself 7 days to learn as much as I can, and that would be enough to start with. This was my way of combating my stupid perfectionist brain. So, here's my general process with the struggles that I faced and the tips and resources that I gathered along the way. And while this is not a tutorial, because I didn't even know what I was doing at the start, I do hope that this helps someone else who's also planning on learning how to make a VTuber. With, or preferably without, a 7-day deadline. Please give yourself more time to learn. Since 7 days isn't a lot of time, I broke it down by parts. Day 1 would be to fully finish the design, then day 2 I would do the line art and the base colors for the model, day 3 would be to do all the shading and highlights, and finally starting day 4 to day 7 I would be working on the rigging itself. Now starting with day 1, we'll be fully fleshing out the design. I started off with making some silhouettes with the lasso tool to make sure that her design would read at a distance, and then I selected the parts that I liked about the design. I didn't have much time to research and gather references and ideas, but in a way it did help me because I didn't overcomplicate the model, and I also didn't spend 4 hours scrolling Pinterest until eventually I just didn't draw. I knew I wanted to make something bright because the designs I've drawn previously all have earthy tones, and I wanted to use hearts and bows as main design elements. And with that, I thought of Valentine's Day conversation hearts. After the first outfit sketch, I realized that I didn't have the time for those, so I threw the design elements that I liked onto an incredibly rushed drawing, and then got to drawing the model itself. You may notice it's in a different file, but that's because I'm silly, and we'll get back to the main one in a moment. Because I'm in a time crunch, I'm making sure to use the symmetry tool while drawing the design itself, so I can later use it as a sketch for the model. I'll explain symmetry more a bit later, but for now I'll just mention that it is important for the models as it makes both the rigging and the drawing process easier. I'm not entirely sure why, but I thought that drawing the back of the design with my incredibly limited time would be a good idea, so you can see me do that right here. When it came to the design elements, well, I didn't want to add too much detail because I would have to then draw and animate it all in 6 days, but I also wanted to add just enough moving parts so it doesn't feel boring to look at. I tried to reuse the heart shape as much as I could, including spots like the hair hoge, shirt cutout, the neckline of her corset, and a few more. If you can spot all of them, I'll give you a Valentine's Day candy. I thought I could add the bows for movement and struggled a little bit when it came to putting down the colors. I felt overwhelmed by all the colors and the results were looking interesting. After a bit, I kind of accepted defeat and then a new 3500 by 7000 canvas, which didn't make my art program lag whatsoever, by the way. I cleaned up the model sketch itself. To spare you the time, here's the final design result. Day 2, I planned to be for line art and base colors, but I opened up my model file and I hated it. Okay, well maybe hate is a strong word, but I didn't like it. One of the things that I wanted to focus on with the model was her face, as when it comes to VTuber designs, you're only really seeing them waist up, so the top half of the body is incredibly important. This is why I also didn't include the big heart ponytails from my initial lasso drafts, because I didn't want there to be clutter on the screen if anyone were to ever use this as a streaming VTuber model. I kept thinking, would this get in the way of a stream? I also wanted to add some contrast to the color scheme, and I went to my beloved Pinterest and found this image of similar candy hearts and went, great, this is mine now. So I resketched the whole thing because who cares about the 7-day plan that I wrote out, and I had plenty of time to do this, so I changed up the colors completely. I mean, I guess there's still a lot of pinks and purples, and those are considered bright, right? Partway through the coloring though, I did notice that she looked a little bit like a Gajinka version of Twilight Sparkles, and that did make me giggle a little bit because it was not really my intention. Now after being completely done with the design, definitely not going to be changing anything else at all later into the process, haha, here's the final design. Day 2 isn't really over yet though, and here's what I got up to next. I'm I'm just gonna save us both some time and skip over showing you the line art. However, I'll quickly go over 2 different ways to approach line art for Vtuber models. And to explain those 2 ways, we'll be quickly going over how Live 2D animation works in general. We'll be drawing something in 2D which will then be animated to look 3D. Because of this, we need to make sure that we add parts that will be moving to our drawing. And to have those parts move and not interfere with other layers, we're also going to need to separate them to different layers. Now, for example, if I wanted to move this bang right here, I wouldn't be able to because it is currently merged down to all of the other layers beneath it. So when I try to move it, it moves the entire drawing. Now, if I were to separate it from all the other layers below it, then I would be able to move the bangs. But when we move, the right side of our hair behaves differently to the left side of the hair. But if we were to try to edit it right now, it's not going to work because both sides are on the same layer. So together with separating the parts into different layers, we'll also have to separate them to left and right parts. After that, we'll be able to move our layers. However, here comes another issue. Now when I move this bang, you can see that underneath this hair, there's nothing there. Now this wouldn't happen in real life or with a 3D model, so it looks very unnatural when it happens to a model as well. And with our goal being making this look as 3D as possible, this isn't gonna cut it. So we will be drawing underneath that layer as well. This is what people refer to as backfilling. Now the reason I said there's 2 ways to go about drawing the line art is because some people like to draw the whole model and then make cutouts of the layer parts that will be moving. I personally prefer to draw all the parts separately and then color them in because it's just easier for me. But I know it can be quite tedious and a lot of people also prefer to just draw the whole thing and then cut things out as they need. I will be linking a really useful guide by Sky on Twitter, which helped me understand separation, and I have no doubt will help you as well. And as a final note, have an idea of how you want to animate your model as you draw it. Having a plan for it will help you understand what layers need to be separated. And a little tip to check how well you've underfilled your layers, you can go to your layer transform menu and change the anchor point of your layer to wherever you want the layer to move from. So for me, for this bang, it would be the top of this head. After changing the anchor point, you see when you rotate the layer, it will rotate off of that anchor point. Now in actual life 2D, you have a lot more control over how things bend and move, so don't stress about making things perfect at this stage. Just make sure that you have the bare minimum down. Day 3 and we're only a little bit behind schedule. This day was supposed to be for shading and highlights, but now we're also going to be adding the base colors into the mix. I started off by fully coloring the front bangs first because I wanted to try the cutout method for the line art here. And as it was a smaller area, I thought it would be fine. I drew all of the line art on one layer, and then I also did all of the coloring on a separate single layer as well. Then I cut out the pieces with a lasso tool, and then I added the underpainting to each layer separately. I did this because I wanted to make sure that the pieces would flow together, as in they were shaded in a similar way, and look like the same part of the hair. But if I were to do this again, to be honest, I would follow this incredibly useful guide by Marsh Panda on X, the Everything app. Twitter bird, I miss you. I'll be including the link in the description though. After the struggle, I realized I didn't draw in the ears. Whoops. I kept getting lost in the countless layers that I already had at this point, and I would highly recommend keeping them all named and colored differently to make it easier to use, but it's unfortunately something I thought would be a waste of time in the moment, which it wouldn't have been, because I had to put them in groups and name them all anyway at the end. You can see though, I have been taking every shortcut there is to make this as quick as possible. I'm duplicating and rotating the hair buns so I don't have to render them 3 separate times, and honestly, from here on, it just kind of had been smooth sailing, so I'll let you just watch the time lapse. One thing to note though before we do end the day, in this part it is important to keep track of the layer hierarchy, which part goes above and below what layers. For example, the neck would go under the head layer but above the chest and so on. I was supposed to do the entire coloring on this day, but after working on it for 5 hours, I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. I felt very tired and I was ready to end the day. Day 4 was unfruitful. I was a little bit burnt out of working on the model, so instead of forcing myself to do work without hate, I took a break and I just hung out with my friends. We played some supermarket simulator and...
We have so many of these? My game only froze once.
Anyway, moving back on to day 5 though. Day 5, I was dedicated to fully finishing the model, shading the face, arms, skirt, and legs. I didn't like her face again, so I resketched it, and hopefully it is the last time I have to do this. I don't really have much to add here, to be honest, other than, well, I was incredibly behind schedule. I felt really bad about it, but at the same time, I just wanted to cut myself some slack. This is the first time I'm doing it, and I'm doing my best, and that's all that matters. But again, it was pretty smooth sailing, so I'll let you just finish watching the time lapse and come back when I get to the part where I draw the face again. Once we get to the mouth, Vtubers, they, well, talk. And when you start yapping, you also open and close your mouth. So in drawing a model, you need to draw the tongue, teeth, and the inside of the mouth as well. I'm using a guide by Mochi Mochi Boo Boo on Twitter, separating all the parts into separate layers, adding the top and bottom lips, and so on. I then move on to the eyes, and because I wanted the eyes to be all bouncy and expressive, I wanted to separate as much stuff as I could, which did create like 15 plus layers by the way, and 10 billion layers of highlights and such for the eyes alone. This is not driving me insane. This is normal. This is fine. And for this part, I used a Twitter post by Studio ECalTD. And that's it. The model is fully drawn, but we're not yet ready to move in live 2D still. I'm going insane. This has taken 5 days of my life. This is taking so long. Day 6, I only have a short clip for, but if you remember, I mentioned that all the parts need to be separated for me to be able to animate them. So I spent day 6 on separating every piece into left and right, naming it, and then putting them into folders to make them easier to go through. This was not an incredibly tedious task whatsoever, and I had an astonishing amount of fun. I did use arrows instead of left or right to describe which eye or leg or whatever it was though, because I'm directionally challenged, and I thought it would be a good tip to include to help out fellow left-right confused besties. Finally, you get to witness our finished model. Anyway, now we move on to the rigging, which will be in the next video. I have awful time management skills. I finished all the rigging, but my computer simply can't handle a 40-minute video, so I'm just going to be splitting it into 2 parts. With this being the first part, aka drawing the model, and then the next video will be me learning to rig. This is the end of the first video. Thank you for watching, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out the second part, where I go over the rigging and the things I wish I had done differently when it came to the illustration itself. And thank you for being here. Bye bye!